Okay, so welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this April Campfire session. Today we have two special guests. We have Jim and Rich from the States, both from Capable Company. And if you've been following Intersections work, then you know that we are a fan of business capabilities if done right. And we don't see that many applications that we would think are right. And I have done some webinars, and capabilities are a big topic in EDGY. And we are super happy that Rich and Jim, both of them, are now advising members at Intersection Group. And together with them, we are working on an extension of the capability topic. So in the next EDGY release, expect some deep dive into the topic. And some of the topics I think we will touch also today. And Jim and Rich, they are both founders of the Capable Company, and they've both written the book with the same name. And Rich has written several other books and so on. And if I read your CVs here, they've been doing this strategy to execution, business architecture, capability, strategic management, consulting thing for at least the half of your career. So that's just a brief introduction. So maybe it's better that I hand over to you so that you maybe introduce yourself a bit more in detail. And then let's kick off the session.
Go ahead, Rich. Introduce yourself.
Okay, yeah, I'm Rich Lynch, and for the past at least 2 decades, maybe longer, I've been building capability models with client teams to do several key things. They usually fall into one of these 4 groups. They're either trying to align their organizations. They may be pursuing a new growth adjacency, and they got to figure out what capabilities they need to go there. Sometimes clients have asked us to focus on targeted cost reduction. And then finally, I've also done quite a few projects where you're really mobilizing the organization to realize a new vision.
I'm Jim Dowling, partner with Rich. And my primary applications are a little bit different, although Rich and I overlap on a number of projects, is around leadership alignment and the information that leaders need to take action on strategy and adapt to changing strategies over time. So as we get through here, we really hope you lead with questions. Post them in the chat, raise your hand. Wolfgang will get our attention and divert us. But we're going to make a very, very short presentations of the topics and of the key elements of the extensions that we're bringing to EDGY around capabilities and how we got there. But your questions are important to us. If any questions come up that require a long answer, we have a webinar coming up, and we'll show you where that's going to, when that's going to take place near the end of this this talk today. So this is a campfire conversation. We'll pick up our end of the conversation. You need to pick up your end of the conversation. So let's get into it. Hopefully, the screen will come up. There we go. So what we're looking at here is how do we get the data from the client into EDGY so that we can leverage the visual capabilities and representations and presentation of that data for conversations that help design enterprises. So if we think about the challenge of getting the data that would populate the EDGY facets and elements, et cetera, how do we go about it? So our approach was twofold. One is we have down below a not so as Wolfgang likes to say, a not so beautiful representation of our approach to doing it, below the beautiful approach of EDGY up above. And I'm going to walk through these very, very briskly, but I want to start not up here in the upper left, but down here at capabilities. So what are the extensions? We define capability as a combination of technology, process, talent, and culture that are tuned to transform a set of specific inputs into specific outputs and outcomes. So the extension is in the definition of what is included in a capability, and then why is it there and how does it help? Originally, this was people, process, and technology. What we learned and what has developed over time is that technology and process have as much influence on culture as does the talent of the organization, of the people in the organization itself. So the idea of separating technology and process and talent from culture just doesn't work in organization design work. So jump down to the bottom here and let's talk about capabilities. Where do they come from? They come from what we call strategies, which are courses of action to achieve a result of a goal. So capabilities are derived through strategies to realize those capabilities in the organization in response to goals. And those goals are derived from the mission, and we express mission as a set of objectives, not the squishy kind of mission that sounds more like purpose and vision, but a specific set of objectives to be achieved. And I'm going to jump over those anchors for a second and come back. And for the most part, mission comes from changing conditions outside the organization, as well as a vision, which are vivid images of the future of the organization in operation, derived from the organization's values or beliefs about how the organization and individuals in the organization ought to behave so that it can fulfill its purpose. Now, purpose is pretty nebulous. One client says that our purpose is to contribute $10 million a year to protect the rainforests of the world. Can anybody tell me what company that is? Nope. It's pretty well hidden. It's Patagonia. They make outdoor clothing. So the outdoor clothing is a means to an end. It can get kind of confusing when people think that the purpose of Patagonia is to make the outdoor clothing, when really the underlying values are around the rainforests of the world. So that means that they would never adopt a capability that puts the rainforests in danger. So the fabrics they use, the materials they use, and the practices and locations, et cetera, are all subject to being connected back to purpose. So the secret sauce, as it were, of this alignment and strategy to action approach is being able to connect the dots from every one of these elements to every other element. And we're going to come back to this a little bit later. But let's get into the capability and see if we can't get you encouraged to drive us in the direction that you would benefit most from in talking about capabilities. Now, please put your questions in the chat, as we said earlier. So we look at the capability as the what. So, for example, a capability, combine elastic and inelastic materials side by side. That's what we want to get to. And we want to get to these kinds of statements in all four of these categories. So we might ask the question, What talent do we need to do that? What process would we use to do that? What technology would we use to do that? And are there any influences of culture that would make a positive contribution being able to combine elastic and inelastic materials side by side? Sometimes not all apply, sometimes only one layer applies, but the more practice you get in designing capabilities, the more you realize that pretty much everywhere, all of these 4 layers are in play. Any questions here? Rich, any anecdote about discoveries or sort of breakthroughs that clients have made in using this kind of conversation?
Sure. I mean, I was in one client, and they were some type of high-tech thing, but there were a bunch of mostly R&D and engineer types, and they thought they were world-class in metal container technology for use in portable energy. And their strategy had them going mobility, but they rated themselves on that capability like they were best in the world. And some person raises their hand in the group and said, you know, we need to have competencies so that we have the capability of handling plastic container. And he said, we're worse. We don't even have that capability. And so that immediately went to, well, what processes do we need to handle plastics as opposed to metal? And they also said, we have no talent that understands that. And immediately the HR person runs out of the room. And I go, where'd you go when they came back? And she goes, we just set up a channel with the university to start recruiting plastic engineers. So, I mean, that was just one example.
So you don't know where they're going to come from. I had a client, a biotech company in California, that the contract that I had with them was to help them redesign their laboratory processes, because the treatments, their gene therapy treatments that they made were designed for infants and small children. And blood draws were a pretty traumatic experience. And they really didn't want kids to grow up thinking that everybody that wore white was a bad person and was going to stab them with something. So as we were working through, I got into a conversation over lunch with a manager that was not participating, wanted to know what we were doing. And she described to me the relationships that they had with the various countries around the world's agencies that authorized the use of those treatments, those gene therapies. I suggested, go ahead, Rich.
Yeah, Jim, we have a question from James.
Okay.
You want me to read the question, or
Go ahead, James. Can you jump in, James?
And so my question was just about, obviously, from a traditional sort of capability mapping exercise, it's relatively straightforward to map the sort of technology, processes, or people that help support a capability. How do you begin to start mapping between the sort of cultural elements and the capability, if you want to be able to sort of articulate that or visualize that?
Yeah, there's the forward approach, which is you articulate a set of values, of valued behaviors, that in such a way that you can connect the dots to say valued behaviors so that purpose fulfilled. So that starts with a behavior, and then that behavior has observable characteristics. So you may have characteristics of behavior around teaming, which would be cultural in nature, and establish that teaming is valuable to us so that we can fulfill our purpose, and then explain why. So first, the forward part is connecting the dots and establishing the desired behaviors in the first place. The second is to ask the question, are these behaviors helpful to this capability. So let's say you're a financial auditor, and sitting across from you is an R&D engineer. Do we want the R&D engineer to be precise and cautious? And do we want the financial auditor to be inventive, creative, and risk-taking? No. What we want is a microculture in the organization that is consistent with the macro culture, which you defined from the purpose of the organization inward. And those are all observable behaviors. And they are measured as intangibles. They are observations, but the ones that are pervasive are the culture. Is that helpful?
Cool. Yeah, thanks. That's great.
Any other questions on that? So in the
We have
process,
another question from Tim.
go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, hi there. It's good to meet you. I read your book many years ago, and it's nice to that is the Capability company, and it's good to meet the authors. So my question is, I read your book because I have been practicing business capability modeling using the resource-based view of the firm approach to business capabilities. So competing for the future and all the historical documentation around business capabilities, academic papers galore, and was writing some articles and was looking for books that, you know, basically I could recommend, and yours was one of them. Because when I read your book, it seemed to align with the general body of work around the resource-based view of the firm of business capabilities. Would you agree with that? Any think differences? I mean, when you talk about technology, process, talent, and culture, for example, so they're the resources that enable the capability. I tend to just say technology, process, people capabilities include skills, knowledge, experience, and behavior, indeed culture. You know, also take into account like location being a key sort of intangible resource, if you like. Tangible, I suppose it is, in the sense of it may be important where you are, or it may be materials. So you need access to cobalt because you know you're looking for a capability to manufacture vehicle batteries or whatever. So yeah, any do you agree with that assessment? I take it you're familiar with the huge body of work around it. Any distinct differences in terms of how you've then applied the theory? Because it's all theory and yours is an application of theory. So yeah, sorry, that was a long-winded.
Yeah, I guess the place where we depart is that resource-based organization design is essentially what resources do we have and can bring to bear here. Our approach is future-based, and that is let's create the utopian vision of the future state of our organization, and then what capabilities do we need to realize it? Some of them will not exist yet, and that's okay. But they can be connected to that vision, even if they're not. And the other idea, other difference is in designing the specific information system that keeps all leaders at all levels of the organization aware of both the vision and the mission objectives of the organization and their own contribution of capabilities to producing those outcomes.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, Jim,
it's just a little different from not very much different in terms of the substance, but in terms of the intent and the way of leveraging it is significantly different.
Yeah, okay. I mean, there obviously capabilities. I look and see what additional new capabilities or improved capabilities you want. Are very much part of RBV? I do like. I mean, I think what I see is you expand on the strategy aspect in terms of how you formulate strategy, and then identify the capabilities required to deliver that strategy. I like your eye chart test, because
Yes.
that does very much illustrate the situation that you see in in all the organizations you walk into.
Right.
It's all a bit fuzzy around their mission, their they might have the values painted up on the wall, but how they quite tie into their mission, to their goals and their strategy. It's often as you describe it. I think you extend the analogy in terms of the quality of eyesight. I'm trying to remember.
Go ahead, Rich. That was your
analogy. It's quite fun. People should look at it. It's quite. It does bring a smile to your face when you read it.
Thank you, Tim, because that was a difficult slide to make back in the day when we wrote the book. But yeah, that's what we're always looking at how do you provide enough clarity? May not need 20/20 eyesight, but you need 20/40 to be able of where you're heading in the future, so that you can articulate the capabilities that you need, whether you have them today or not. And then it becomes, it also provides the insight around the strategies about that Jim will be talking about in a minute, about how are we going to evaluate these capabilities and how are they contributing to the capabilities that move us forward. So Jim will talk with that in a bit. And that's basically the difference then, to answer your question.
Okay. So let's look at capabilities in sort of a couple of different lights. In our methodology, we use 3 layers of capabilities: the directing and controlling capabilities, the operating capabilities, and the enabling capabilities. Certainly our HR and our IT friends don't like the idea of just being called an enabler. And our psychologists really don't like us calling them an enabler in the organizations, but they map. You'll find pretty much the capabilities that we would collect into the directing and controlling model would feed over onto the right-hand side along with strategic management and enterprise design and the such. The operating layer would map pretty directly into the main section, customer interaction, train operations, and railway and infrastructure. And then the enabling layer is sort of in between and referred to as support. The point of this is how you collect the information is those conversations is what builds the coalition of leaders who will make change happen. How you explain those and describe those to people who are not involved in collecting the data is as or more important to getting the backing behind you to actually take action. And what we saw, or what I saw when I first looked at EDGY, was that's the way to hold those conversations with the people who are not in the know. And this is a useful way of collecting the data. So we'll move on a little bit, but do you see how that mapping and that method? The key to this is principles. Don't spend your life working on methods and tools and techniques. Make it selecting the right set of design principles. Or patterns, as it were, in the architectural language. Apply the patterns without getting hung up too much on fixating on the how. At the same time, if people get used to seeing the capability map, you're going to need to explain the capability model. So let's explain the capability model to you and see what questions come out of that. So to start with, we urge, constrain, and beg clients not to go below 3 levels. Top level, being the families of capabilities. Then we move into the generic capability groups, and then the specific capabilities. We also phrase them in a certain way. And that is, there's an action word, gather, and then there is a noun phrase, customer requirements. Why? So that it makes its own story. So you can, actually, I took this and I jammed it into, I took this particular one and I jammed it into a generative AI application and asked it to come back with an abstract of an essay. And it did a remarkable job. I failed to paste it in here, but you can try that yourself. But the idea is that at the top level, we need to provide solutions along the care continuum. And this is the care of patients, right, Rich?
Right, yes.
Along the
This
care
is a large
continuum.
hospital, right?
Yeah. And then what we would say is, so to provide solutions along the care continuum, we must be able to gather customer requirements, develop regular cadence of new products in the ... et cetera, et cetera. And then down below, and we must be able to build and acquire new platforms for better patient care. And then in order to build those platforms, we must facilitate ordering appropriate tests. So the selection of language construct is so that it tells its own story. And it also flips on process. Okay, this is a process symbol. We apologize to our folks that capability symbol should be rectangular. But it's the way we started it, and it's the way you'll see in a little while why we stuck with it. But the idea here is, and this is sort of a magical thing, is if you're designing a new organization that's never existed before, you will start off with a director of providing solutions along the care continuum. And you will have a director of each one of these capability families. And so it gives you an organization structure with a mandate for what that organization below this is going to do. Any questions on language and syntax and structure here? No. Okay.
Yeah, Jim, go ahead.
Rich, can you describe this for us?
No, I want to go back to the other one.
Okay, here you go.
For a minute. So we talk about capability modeling, and they're not quite the same as a capability map. So basically, if you build a model like you here that have 3 levels, like the 2, 2.5, and then the 2.51, et cetera. What we would transfer to a capability map in EDGY is the level 1. We need the ability to provide solutions along the care continuum. Maybe you can shorten words, maybe you can't. We also, the next level in EDGY in a capability map would be, we need the ability to create evidence-based portfolios. And that would be the level, but that wouldn't be enough to actually take action, either to target a cost takeout or to move into a new growth area. So we had to be very careful, because I worked with the client on this one, and when we talked about you need just to create new products, and they go, no, not just any products. We need a portfolio of evidence-based products, which we don't have now. And so the extra words, which may not be as elegant as EDGY, but are necessary to determine, okay, if we need to build and acquire new platforms for better patient care, then what specifically do we need the ability to do? And at that level, you can measure stuff. You can talk about how it's contributing to your vision and your purpose and your mission objectives. And you can also assess performance. And if you don't have the capability, well, can you acquire the capability, or do you have to build the capability? So you're able to make a whole bunch of decisions that align and move the organization. So that's all.
So let's see what that looks like. Rich, can you tee this up for our?
Yes, I'm trying to. Yes. So this is a hypothetical. that we use in our capability development course out on Maven. But this is a non-profitable that wants to end malnutrition in the world. It's a little small group, and we started off small, I think, in Rhode Island or Connecticut in the States. And they were very clear about what they needed. And when you read about what the CEO, how she describes the company, she just oozed out capabilities. There's almost every other word in her videos. But they needed, at the high level, to build brand advocacy. They had to build a global network, because clearly they couldn't get into hundreds of countries easily unless they had a network that could do that. Where they really wanted to focus on their solutions was around formulating new products that would end childhood malnutrition. Then they had some other operational stuff about the supply chain, to make sure there's no hiccups in it. And then what they focused on is running 3 shifts around the clock and getting the products to their strategic partners that could get it in country. So it's very clear about what they needed. And, when COVID hit, they had a little wrinkle in their plan as well. Can we address hunger as well? But that's what this story is telling.
Yeah.
Jim?
So here is where I would say that you would end up, potentially, you could end up with as many as 6 leaders at the executive table, each accountable for delivering this capability, brand advocacy, partner network, et cetera, each accountable for delivering the capabilities and the outcomes and outputs of those capabilities to the organization and to the children where they're trying to eliminate malnutrition. So the choice of structure and presentation, et cetera, for us is partly because of the way that we now want to carry this into, let's say, a service level architecture for IT, or for an organization structure backbone for the organization that will deliver this capability. And as Rich described, it moves on if you go multidimensional. In this case, this is another dimension on it, where you've got contribution up here in the corner. And it says, green means that this makes a larger contribution to fulfilling our purpose of a nonprofit and child nutrition. This has a higher degree of contribution to that than does this one over here, which is identify and prioritize unmet needs.
Yeah, Jim, if I can comment on that, it's because the purpose can be, yes, it has to meet that, but it gets a little bit more specific about how does it move the organization towards the vision and the mission objectives. So it gets a little bit more granular that you can answer, well, what abilities do we need?
So another extension is the idea of classifying capabilities to help make decisions. So the green capabilities would be considered the distinctive ones. They're the ones that differentiate this organization from every other one like it or striving to be like it in the marketplace. So these are your competitive advantage capabilities up here. To the left of them, your support capabilities are the ones that that directly enable distinctive capabilities, but aren't even seen by the in the marketplace necessarily. And then below left are your necessary things. And I always say filing your taxes and keeping the lights on is down here. And then over here are the essentials. And the idea for the essentials is that they contribute significantly to your financial outcomes of your organization. They keep you vital. But they aren't distinctive in the eyes of your customers. They may be distinctive in the eyes of your investors, your donors, your benefactors, et cetera. Now, what does that mean? What that means is that if you want to maximize the value contribution of a capability here, it has to be effective. You favor effectiveness over efficiency. In this block, you would you would favor effectiveness over efficiency. Down here, efficiency with no defects. And over here, effective and efficient in some balance. That's the little colon in here, in some balance. Now, for IT selection, in a previous life, I built selection models to help people choose technologies. For example, ERP systems. We took the 32,000 capabilities of SAP and we codified them into these categories for a client and came back and said, these are the ones you're going to adapt the solution to your way of working. And these are the ones you're simply going to adopt the way they come in, and we will change the organization as necessary to adopt those capabilities.
Jim, just another couple of uses of understanding the value contribution. So I mentioned earlier, I did a lot of work targeting strategic financial cost takeout, whether it's through Lean or Six Sigma or whatever. But we asked the question, where do you target? Well, now you focus on the necessity and the essential work to take out as much cost while still being basically an industry par on value. But on the top, when I was looking at new growth platforms and other growth adjacencies, you really had to look at, okay, of all the distinctive capabilities in our future state, which ones do we have to act on now? Which can we postpone to a little bit later? But at least say, do they show up in our project management office? How come there are no projects going on that are building capabilities that are needed to realize this future state? So just a couple of practical operational examples of kind of day-to-day leadership in organizations.
Any questions on this idea of classification, support, distinctive, necessary, essential, and how it's leveraged? Anybody get involved in these conversations as to how to prioritize projects? Well, if you do, we say that this is a suggestion, that these don't get applied dogmatically. They are simply suggestions of how you want to think about doing what you're going to do. Because when it comes down to things like a project portfolio, you've got talent constraints, you've got scheduling constraints, you've got prerequisites that have to take place. So sometimes you have to do some necessary work in order to build the infrastructure to support distinctive work. Okay.
Hey, Jim, about 15 minutes left. Go ahead.
Yep. Okay, so now we look at capability heat, where Rich was just talking about. Another dimension in this automated version of capability modeling tool that's available from a couple of different sources. WorkFit by Excellair, and that's also platformed on ServiceNow. So this one color codes the gap between the required capability level of performance and the actual level of performance. And so now this is bringing attention to these red cubes that indicate that you need some attention here now, and maybe you can get to these later. You have the resources to it, because they're not going to be the ones that are going to hinder you from ending childhood malnutrition.
Right. And Jim, just in my experience of all the models that I've worked with teams to build, when you just measure efficiency and effectiveness, you get one heat map view. And it often tells people to focus on the wrong projects. When you also layer in, what you did on the prior slide, what's the value contribution? How does it impact your financials and your impact on strategy? It gives a whole different story. So it's really critical, as our project managers know, that you're focusing and you're using your own precious resources on the things that really matter towards the direction and future of the company.
I had the CFO remind me at the close up of a project once at a very large bank, that when they came in, one of my consultants asked, "What keeps you up at night?" And he said, "Now that you're leaving, I've got 50 more things that keep me up at night." And that was all the hidden red, all the hidden heat, because they had never multiplied the efficiency and effectiveness ratings by the value contribution level requirements. Okay. Good. So the idea here is that you can use something like our framework, and we can give you some links and things like that where you can go explore this. But you can get on capablecompany.com and you can explore this framework, and it'll take you down a couple more levels. But the idea here is that you want to collect a library of trusted content that leaders at all levels can refer to when they're making decisions. And when you do that, they are able to make decisions independently and collectively in alignment, because they're all working from the same trusted content. It's like all of the different aspects of an IT department working from an aligned set of blueprints of various architectures, from the network architecture and layering it up all the way to the user experience. And by including tangibles and intangibles, you have a way of thinking about and codifying the capabilities that directly enable the experience that you're trying to deliver over here. And how to take those from from a capability model. So on another one of these, that's always up here, and I've been doing it so frequently, my cursor runs there all by itself. From capability model, and connect the dots to the assets that the processes are producing, to the leverage of those assets all the way across to the by the organization to fulfill its purpose, et cetera. And using the storytelling enablement of EDGY with a integrated data collection mechanism and data collection sort of fabric or framework, then you can populate EDGY with what is relevant to the facets and the elements here, which is just about everything. I think Rich once mapped every one of these across, and then you can tell the compelling story that gets the investment to realize the new enterprise. Any questions here?
Jim, you said you were going to talk about anchors later. I don't think.
Yeah, let's go back to anchors. So what we mean by anchors are trusted pre-made decisions. Organizations have a tendency, or let's just say senior leaders have a tendency to not share everything with the leaders that report to them, and they don't share everything with the leaders at the next level down. It's almost like the security need to know. You don't need to know. So what happens at the middle layers and the lower layers of organization is people make stuff up. So they read the website and it gives them a purpose. They read the purpose statement and they say, that's a company I want to join. They get into the organization and that's not the company they thought they were joining. Leaders take at face value what is behaviors are dictating, and then they follow the behaviors as opposed to the choices that they make. So think of it, among anchors, you would have things like, this is a list of our customers, and we design our products for these few customers, for this customer segment. We are willing to sell to these customers, but not below 80% of maximum retail price. So they make conscious decisions, but they don't communicate those decisions. So salespeople, for example, run off and they try to sell whatever sells the easiest to make their quotas. But are they making the most money for the organization? Are they selling it below the cost? That doesn't matter that much to them as long as they get their sales orders approved and they make their quotas. But if everybody sharpens their, go ahead.
No, Jim, I was just going to throw another anchor, and we can talk about this because we published an article on it at Intercontinental Hotel Group when Jim and I worked with a very large team of internal, external folks. They made a key choice about the future of before it was 6 continents at the time, that they wanted to be an integrated company. Well, they behaved like a holding company, which meant each different business could have its own systems. And when you look at an integrated company, you want preferably one system, whether it's an HR system, a reservation system, call centers, etc. So what happened was when they made that decision, we want to be an integrated company. It means we have one strategy, we use shared systems and a whole bunch of other attributes. The results were amazing because we were able to go from 7 reservation systems to 2, and we went from like 20 or 23 call centers to 3. So we were able to move to the future state at the same time do a significant cost takeout. So just an example. And Jim, we had another question from Tim. Does your approach include any normalization aspect to it? So capability instances,
you just gave an example of that, I think. So basically,
okay,
where you got, say, a capability that you've identified, which is actually required by other lines of business, or even within the same line of business. So data analytics is a classic one, where basically supply chain management and the operations, the manufacturing side, in your example, they both need data analytics, but they both have identified that capability requirement, and they would not have used the term independently, and have got IT building, independently, a data analytical solution, when in fact, that's one capability with one common set of resources, but 2 capability instances, i.e. within supply chain management and within operations. So but Richard, I think you in the example you gave about going from 5 contact centers to 1 contact center or whatever, that you can repeat your example if you like, because I think it demonstrates.
Yeah. The idea there is if it is your aim to provide one user experience, then you should probably not have replicated that capability 7 times over. And 1 for Holiday Inn hotels, 1 for Intercontinental hotels, 1 for State Suites, etc. You should have 1 contact center. Interesting on that particular case with Intercontinental hotels is the fact that they identified a customer segment that they thought they were serving. When they interviewed them, they said, "You're not," and they actually invented a new hotel brand specifically for that customer segment. Another outcome, I just talked to Andrew the other day, Rich. Another concept was after we had left and we got an award from ATD for the program, a company in Bangalore came forward and said, "We will pay to locate all the technology and the management for 1 year if you consolidate your financial services centers in Bangalore, in India." And one of the team members, Andrew Simpson, went off and set that whole thing up in India and consolidated all financial services for all of the hotel brands in 1 location. And then he did the same thing at Nationwide Insurance, just following the pattern. So that idea of, how do you get at the capabilities, both tangible and intangible, that deliver both the tangibles and the intangibles, and then map them back here so you make the case that we need to make these changes in organization, and we need to make these changes in product and architecture so that we can deliver on that promise.
Hey, Jim, we got 5 minutes.
We do. Oh, Wolfgang, let's give you some clock time here. So we already talked about this, and that is, how do we go about this? The 2-dimensional to the multi-dimensional model, etc. So I think we can pass on that. But here's just another view, and can you speak a little bit to this and then tee up what's coming down the road for these folks, Wolfgang?
Yeah, so if you're not so familiar with intersection groups work, I know some of the names. Some names here are new to the community. At least I've never heard those names. That's a beautiful Milky Way map. Annika Clever from Sweden, they invented it at her company. And it's a way to connect capabilities with the ecosystem, with the clients, the users of the system, people, in that case, the customer, and his or her journey. So you have the journeys in red, which is an EDGY element. EDGY is our product, and I will talk about this also in 2 minutes, and to the purposes of the enterprise. So the idea of a Milky Way is it is a visual representation of the whole piece, whole business on a napkin, if you want. Yeah, so you can have a bird's eye view on everything that's going on a very high level, and thereby you can connect the capabilities we need to develop and we need to set up to the tasks and journeys of the client. That's the idea of this map here. And that has an experience focus and also this architecture capability focus and this identity focus in the purpose field. Okay, so that's it from your side, Rich and Jim?
No, Jim has one more.
Yeah.
Go ahead. No, we're good.
You're good?
No.
Okay. So then, first of all, thank you very much, Jim and Rich, to present your experience on capabilities. As mentioned in the beginning, you can see that today's Campfire was done by Jim and Rich alone, and I was really silent. And we've done also quite some research, and in EDGY we have capability specification, we have a training and so on. And on June 18 it is, I think, you have all 3 hands-on people in one room. So it's highly recommended. What we will do in the meantime is to tell a seamless story between the 20 years or 30 years of experience of Rich and Jim and with EDGY. So we are keen to work closer and closer to introduce the concepts you've seen today. There are some concepts we don't have in EDGY. For example, culture as part of capabilities is subject for discussion, and other aspects, heat mappings and so on. That's a lot. There's a lot of substance in your work, and we will make the next step until this webinar. And of course, feel free to visit our other events. So intersection.group/events is the place to be. So this week in May 2nd, Milan will give an introduction to EDGY if you haven't seen it. And then we have Bart talking about our enterprise design patterns, then the capability webinar. And then Annika, the Milky Way. It was only 5 seconds today. She will do an enterprise on a napkin for a full hour, highly recommended. And of course, what we want to see is to meet many of you in Rome at our conference. So this is our flagship event. And I've heard rumors that Jim and or Rich will be there. And there may be also a talk so you can meet us all in person. So that's the final promo slide for today. And with that, I think.
Wolfgang, can you put the put a link to the events page in the chat, folks?
Yes,
and one in for capability development.
Yeah, Jim, I put one in for capability development.
Got it here, and it
2-week course.
Here we go. Here's the link to our events page. Yeah, and I think that's it for today. Thank you all for participation, and Jim and Rich, thank you for putting it together and telling your capability story. And I'm looking forward to our collaboration and to have a lot of wisdom from your experience in EDGY. And all hoping to meet many of you in one of our upcoming events. So thank you very much.
Can we go over to James and run over just a little bit for anybody who wants to pose a question?